I spent 40 years surrounded by people and still felt completely invisible. It took one stranger to make me realize I was never truly alone. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 72 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was alone. Not the kind of alone people imagine. No, my life looked normal from the outside. I worked for decades as a night security guard. I had coworkers. I lived in an apartment building with neighbors on every floor. I spoke to cashiers at grocery stores, nodded at people in elevators, exchanged small talk about the weather. But none of those things touched the quiet place inside me. That's the kind of loneliness people don't understand. You can stand in a crowded room and still feel invisible. I grew up an only child. My parents weren't cruel, but they weren't affectionate either. My father believed emotions were weakness. My mother stayed busy, tired from work and life. We rarely hugged. We rarely said, "I love you." So I learned early that needing connection was something you kept to yourself. As I got older, that belief followed me everywhere. I dated a few times in my 20s, but I always pulled away when things became serious. Part of me assumed people would leave eventually, so it felt safer not to let them get close in the first place. Years passed faster than I expected. Work, sleep, bills, repeat. I told myself I preferred independence, but independence isn't the same as connection. By my 40s, weekends were the hardest. That's when the silence felt loudest. I'd watch families at parks, couples at restaurants, friends laughing over drinks. I convinced myself I didn't belong in those spaces, so I stayed home. Television became background noise to fill empty rooms. And slowly, decades went by. 40 years can disappear when every day looks the same. The turning point came from something small. One winter evening, I slipped on ice outside my apartment building and hit the ground hard. I wasn't seriously injured, but I couldn't get up easily. For a moment, lying there in the cold, one thought terrified me. If something happens to me, nobody will know. That realization shook me more than the fall itself. A neighbor I barely knew, a young guy named Marcus, saw me and ran over to help. He lifted me up, brushed snow off my coat, and asked if I was okay. Then he did something unexpected. He checked on me again the next day, and the day after that. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. That simple kindness cracked something open inside me. For years, I believed loneliness meant being physically alone. But that wasn't true. I had spent decades surrounded by people, coworkers, neighbors, strangers, and still felt isolated. The real problem wasn't the absence of people. It was the absence of connection. Loneliness isn't measured by how many people are around you. It's measured by how seen you feel. Marcus started stopping by occasionally. Sometimes we'd talk about sports, sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing important at all. But those conversations mattered. They reminded me I existed in someone else's world. That was new. Then something even stranger happened. I began noticing connection everywhere. The barista who remembered my coffee order, the cashier who asked how my day was, the elderly woman in my building who smiled when I held the door for her. For decades, I had dismissed those moments as meaningless. But they weren't meaningless. They were tiny threads of human connection. And when you weave enough threads together, you start to feel less alone. Here's the truth most people misunderstand. Being alone and feeling unloved are not the same thing. You can have a family, a partner, dozens of friends, and still feel unloved. And you can live by yourself and feel deeply connected to the world. Loneliness began fading from my life not when I found romance, not when I made a huge group of friends, but when I allowed small connections to matter. A conversation, eye contact, kindness, presence. Connection doesn't require history. Sometimes it only requires openness. I spent 40 years believing something was wrong with me, that I was different, disconnected, incapable of belonging. But the truth was simpler and harder at the same time. I had built walls so high that connection couldn't reach me. Once I started lowering them, even strangers could step inside. Today, my life still looks quiet from the outside. I still live alone. I still value solitude. But I don't feel invisible anymore. I have neighbors who greet me by name. I volunteer twice a week at a community center. I share conversations with people I never would have spoken to before. And the loneliness that once felt permanent, it's mostly gone. Not because my circumstances changed dramatically, but because my relationship with connection changed. If you're listening to this and you feel alone, I want you to understand something important. Loneliness doesn't end when you find the perfect partner. Loneliness ends when you allow yourself to be seen, even in small moments. Connection can begin with a stranger, a conversation, a smile, a shared experience. 40 years alone taught me this. We don't need a lifetime of relationships to feel loved. Sometimes, we just need one moment of genuine human connection to remind us we were never truly alone. And that moment can happen anytime, even today.